and I can get away with dressing pretty conservatively in terms of, gray or navy slacks and suits and or khakis and like that. So if I want a little more splash in my outfit, I tend to do it with the necktie. So what I've done with my neckties, for example, is you can buy from the NFB Independence Market a set of sew-in labels that have numbers on them, 1 to 25. And you can make your own labels if you need more numbers than that. And what you want to do, what I do is then I keep a file in my note taker that has each number listed and describes it. So I found that to be a really useful way to do it. And you could do that with other items of clothing as well, depending on how important you think it is to have a good, thorough description of the item. I tend to think that's really important for neckties. Not as important for shirts and slacks, or unless they're really busy. When you wear any item of clothing that's very busy in terms of colors and pattern, you want to make sure that you know everything that's in there so you can make sure that nothing is going to clash with anything else you're wearing. So that's kind of, and learning what colors go together is, it's just a matter of asking questions. You can typically get, you can typically get blues to go together. You can get blues and reds to go together, but you are going to have more trouble getting blues and greens to go together, for example. Your brighter colors, you need to be more judicious with. So, and I mean, that covers just a little of what I've learned over the years. And sometimes you just learn by experience. Sometimes you learn by making mistakes. It's always good to have friends that are honest with you about how you look, so that you can make any adjustments that you need to tend to make. So, I mean, that's generally the advice I give people. And like I said, I'm a fairly conservative dresser. Now, I've also learned recently about different styles of dress that are permitted in business. We just recently began allowing at the Jernigan Institute a style of dress called smart casual. So I don't have to dress like this every day anymore with a shirt and coat and tie. I can wear slacks and a nice polo shirt, as long as it doesn't have a really conspicuous logo other than the NFB logo, or anything inappropriate on it. And what I mean by a polo shirt or a knit shirt is the shirts that have collars and maybe 2 or 3 buttons. And if you wear those, by the way, you never button the top button, never. So you can get away with that in some workplaces. In some workplaces nowadays, you can get away with a little bit less than that. Not less clothing, but less formal. Business casual, I'm told, in some companies can even encompass jeans, but nice jeans, not like ripped jeans or anything like that. So it really depends on the culture of where you work. And you need to be aware of that. You need to ask people you trust, how do people around the office tend to dress, and who's perceived as what's perceived as good dress around here and what isn't. So always be aware that you need to maintain that kind of awareness, if that's not redundant, so that you are fitting in with the template of where you work. Now, and some places, will let you be way more individualistic than others. So if you can be individualistic, that's fine, but just make sure that you know that. Make sure that you know the variety of what's expected. And that's really what I have to say. And I look forward to any questions that people might have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. And if anybody knows the name of the device that he was mentioning, please let us know, because that sounds like a good one that might be quite handy. Joe, if you would mind going ahead and go next, because I don't think Mary has made it back on the call just yet. So if you would tell us, you also...
I'm here, by the way.
Oh, she is here. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Mary is here. Okay. Well, then whichever one wants to go next can go. It doesn't really matter.
The gentleman may go.
Okay. All right. Joe is here to talk about dressing snazzy, as well as interview tips when we're making that, how important that first impression is.
Sure. Afternoon, everyone, or depending on where you are, good morning and soon to be good night. Shara, thank you for having me here today, and all of you being a part of the NFB festivities. As you had mentioned, as you have heard, rather, my name's Joe Buzon. I've been at the commission for about 15 years or so in different positions, but most specifically overseeing our employment engagement unit. So pertaining to internship, job fairs, volunteering, informational interviews, mentoring, and the list goes on. But I believe I'm here to really touch upon a few things. Chris, fantastic job about dress for success and kind of the perspective of expectations for a man and the dress attire. I will mention a few things, but then move on quickly to interviewing, some things I've learned over the years, what I hear from employers. Companies like State Street here in Massachusetts, we're really known for our health organizations and education, what they have kind of told us and what they think kind of this interpersonal skills, as well as kind of the hard skills, really go hand in hand in selling yourself. Quickly, dress for success. What I'm wearing at the moment is similar to Chris. I'm really dressed more formal. I have a black blazer on, which is kind of different material. It's a crushed velvet, but solid, but it has a tactile feeling to it, and visually you can see it's more winter material. And then to give it a little bit of a flair, if you will, as Chris had mentioned, if you're not as conservative, instead of a tie, I'm wearing a traditional bow tie. However, the bow tie is kind of grayish shades, but then if you look at it visually, it appears to be glass, but it's hard glass. So it's very different. I have the neckties as well as a wooden bow tie. But I'd like to kind of, I say this in a way that hopefully comes out as people who are visually impaired, whether personally or professionally, we're going to stand out. So in many ways, I kind of want to be able to carry myself in a way that if you're really going to stare at me awkwardly because you really haven't seen a person who's blind or whatever your rationale is, I want to make sure you remember me in a good way, hopefully. So that's what I'm wearing, other than a plain white dress shirt underneath, because the bow tie speaks for itself, because that's what stands out, kind of like what Chris was talking about. And then underneath that, obviously with Zoom, I'm rocking sweatpants here, right? I don't have, on Zoom, we don't have to wear the dress pants and the whole 9 yards with shoes and all of those things. Transitioning, because I know I want to save time also for the other panel member to speak and give the other perspective of appropriate dress attire, is kind of the tricks and tips for that delicate dance of interviewing, especially during these times of pandemic and COVID. A lot of what we've experienced is a lot of individuals are doing telephone calls, and then the second interview will be via Zoom, and then if and when appropriate, in person. So I want to start kind of with the blindisms, if you will, in the sense that, how do I line myself up? I myself am a JAWS user, voiceover. I do use a cane. I notice on the participants list, I know a lot of people on the call. Hello there. And those that I don't meet, I look forward to meeting you in the future. Is especially, I'm personally using a laptop versus a desktop. for those that maybe have already experienced this, a laptop can be a little bit more difficult because the camera, you close it, open it, and it doesn't open at the same spot. So if you can find a way to really maybe put a locator dot or something to block the laptop from opening too far back, where you only can see my forehead, and I'm looking up people who have full vision, perhaps looking right up your nostrils, or whatever the funny scenario may be, is before I would go on an interview, if appropriate, I would have someone who's perhaps sighted, if available. If not, there's so many applications out there like Be My Eyes and Ira, and the list goes on to make sure you're right, centered, and perfect in the middle of the camera. In addition, because of our new norm, or getting to our new norm, our background. My background currently is just a plain white background. You kind of want to brand yourself, where I was going earlier for Dress for Success, the Commission for the Blind with Commissioner David D'Arcangelo. Some of you have heard him speak, of course. He has a lot of MCB members have the Mass Commission for the Blind background. For interviewing, I really wouldn't do any of those things, but that's a nice little touch to represent your organization, kind of like the NFB tie or the shirt and that marketing piece. So that's covering the Zoom, the laptop, the desktop, and then now your background. And then kind of the questions, right? The meat and potatoes of it all. A lot of organizations are really moving, and you probably have seen this, and then maybe, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted to many of you, are using behavioral questions. Instead of your standard questions of what's your weakness, what's your strength, is kind of when did you make a mistake and how did you rectify it? So they're really seeing how you react to that. And I've noticed recently myself that they may have a 2-part or 3-part question. So tell me when you made a mistake, how you rectified it, and who was involved in making that mistake. Sometimes when you answer the first and second question, the third question's already lost. So one recommendation that you may already think of is, can you please repeat the last part of that 3-part question? And that's perfectly fine to do. So if you Google a lot of these things, you'll see is, honestly, I've seen this before, and they say is, if you could be any animal, what animal would you be and why? Another question would be if your management, if you were looking to have a supervisor, and if you had to use a tree as an example, what kind of tree would you like them to be? Right? I would say maybe a Christmas tree because they're always enthusiastic, or maybe an oak tree because they're strong, or another tree that can weather all seasons. They're really trying to figure out what's your personality, how do you handle kind of pressure? Can you think on your feet? How flexible are you and nimble? And the list goes on from there. The number one question, in my opinion, and from what I've seen in research, I believe still has not changed, is kind of tell me about yourself. So broad, and purposely so, because they want to see where do you take it. What I do is we recommend is really break it down into maybe your education, and then to your professional experience, and then put a little personal touch onto it, what you're comfortable with sharing. Essentially, you're hoping to share your story and let it soar. And you want to be confident, but not too boastful and arrogant. And whether you're type A or type B, just like anything else, practice makes perfect. I really recommend is to try to simulate the interview, in the sense that recently we had an individual that I was working with, as well as a friend, going for an interview. Many people are unemployed, right? Is do a Zoom meeting, have the 3 friends or family members interview you, because a lot of interviews also are panels where they're going to go machine guns, kind of round robin, one question, another question, then another question. And at times there's going to be a lot of silence, because the first person will give the question like Shara, then she'll take notes, then they'll go to Chris, then Chris and be comfortable with that silence and being able to take internal breaths and prepare yourself for the next question. A lot of things too is just smiling. Obviously, in my opinion, for those that are visually impaired, I can tell when someone's smiling, when they're not, when they're kind of have that passion or their drive in that voice. Obviously, we don't want to be over the top and kind of and scare them away, but you do want to smile and show your teeth if you can. A lot of people really at times may have a difficult, that's one of their challenges. A couple of things that are commonplace that are worth noting. Come up with a question. For example, especially with these times, a question that I have done and heard and probably for years to come, because things are very unstable and depending on where you are, where do you see the organization in 5 years because of COVID? Or how have things changed with the pandemic in terms of culture and just everything just generally? One thing that could be a whole different type of workshop, I opened it up with this delicate dance of interviewing. And another D is this delicate dance of disclosure. So for those that want to disclose, whether in your cover letter or in your resume, or do you do it before the phone call? For those that have more functional vision and perhaps don't use a cane, do you do it when you at the end of the interview? And because it's so individualized, the answer is probably what you know is whatever you're comfortable with. It's extremely situational in terms of disclosure and when do you tell them, because they're wondering, right? That's the big question. How are you going to do the work? How do you access a computer? How do you get around? And the list goes on and so forth, pertaining, telling them about the vision impairment. In my scenario, where I worked at kind of over the years at the Carroll Center for the Blind in Massachusetts in Newton, for those who are out of state, hopefully know about CCB, or if you're going to Perkins or Mab Vision Community or MCB and National Press, just rattled up a bunch of things, then I would disclose technically, right? Because that could be an asset in terms of your diversity and your disability. But maybe you should consider perhaps not disclosing if and when you apply to the kind of the world of non-disability, if you will. Other questions that are worth noting is that I've heard is, what's the most creative thing that you have done? Others is, can you pick 3 words to describe yourself and why you picked those 3 words? What I also do, because I like to, like many of us, we want to practice what we preach, is go back and forth. It may seem silly in terms of, I do this with my nieces and nephews on Sundays when I see them. We interview each other, right, at the dinner table, and we figure out what we're going to say, how you're going to say it, how does it land, and kind of all that delivery process and all of those things, kind of like a mock interview. I look forward to some of the questions at the end as well, is because sometimes one of the weaknesses, I don't want to say a weakness, is one person, I myself, I can ramble. So I want to be more concise, more sweet, more tighter, especially during an interview. So I'm just checking.
Oh, I think we lost him for a second.
Yeah, I think it just froze a sec.
As well. So my pleasure is up to you here.
Okay, you cut out for a minute, so we didn't hear the last of what you said there, Joe. You cut out on us for a minute.
Shara, just basically saying that I can pause here for any Q&A or hand it over to the next panel member. I just want to make sure that I'm being respectful for the time and letting me know where you want to go with the panel.
Yes, I would like to move on to Mary, and then we'll take questions and answers at the end. I want to tell you that I just recently had an interview My first interview was on the phone, second was with 2 people, and the third interview had 8 panelists, and it was on Zoom, and it was interesting. Mary, Mary, go ahead, please, and tell us about your ways of dressing. We haven't gotten the female perspective yet, so would love to hear about your. And Mary, I don't know if Mary's on video today or not, but Mary's.
I am.
Okay. Mary is always extremely beautiful, so hopefully she'll tell us about what she's wearing today. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. Okay. Hey, y'all. So excited to be here. Thank you, Shara, for inviting me. My name is Mary Fernandez. I am currently living in New Jersey. I consider myself to be a Jersey girl through and through. My pronouns are she, her. I currently work at Cisco Systems, the people that make WebEx. And I am in a leadership rotational program. I just graduated with my master's in business administration from Duke in May of 2020. So I started at Cisco over the summer and at the end of July. And I am currently in the inclusion and collaboration team, creating a global collaboration strategy. Sorry, let me turn off my voiceover. There we go. And so let me start with the dress, and then I'll go on to add on to what Chris and Joe have already said on interviews, which have been amazing. So to build on with what has been said, fully embrace, I call it party on the top, business on top, party on the bottom, now that we're on Zoom. So I fully embrace that. I encourage you to embrace that as well. I don't think jeans should ever become a thing ever again. Personally, I think they should go out the door with handshakes. But that's my perspective. So today, I'll start with that. So today, my hair is up. I have dark curly hair. I am wearing these white gold earrings with rose quartz, which are a really, really light pink rock, and they are like drop earrings, so they're just like a little chain hanging down. I am wearing a pink and white scarf because scarves are amazing, and then I'm wearing a dark, like a navy top, dark navy top, is short sleeve with a little like cutout on the shoulders. So, and that's all you can see of me, so that's all that I will describe. And I am Latina, so I'm like a brown color going on here, and I like to identify that as well. So when it comes to dress, I always like to say you need to start from the foundation. And what is the foundation? Is your underwear, y'all. For people who identify as women and who use bras, it is so important to get the right size bra and the right style so that you feel comfortable, because there is nothing worse than straps sliding, things being too tight, things being too loose. What if it pops out? What's going to happen? So I highly recommend going to somewhere like Nordstrom and getting measured so that you know what your cup size is and you know what your band size is, and being aware of that, because our bodies change all throughout our lives, and it might be that one time you're this size, but another time you're another size. So being very aware of where you are and what feels most important is what feels comfortable. And then as far as like underpants, like make sure that you're wearing things that aren't like rolling down when you move, that aren't causing issues, because I don't know about y'all, that's happened to all of us, and particularly things like leggings and stuff, if like the waistband starts going down, that just is very distracting. So start with the underwear, make sure that you feel good and comfortable. It should be so comfortable that it's a non-issue. You should not, at no point should your underwear make itself known. And I'll stop talking about underwear now. So now that we hit that, we can talk about dress. So as has been mentioned before, think about the context. So I work at a tech company based out of California. Our dress code is like non-existent. As in when people used to go into the office, like software engineers, basically, they just show up. However, sometimes they look like they literally just rolled out of bed. But since they make us money, people are like, whatever, you can do whatever you want. And here's some snacks while you do it. So be aware of what that is, but then also be aware of what your style is. I think it's really important that I don't think we talk about this enough as blind people. Like everybody has a personal style, and make sure that your style is yours and it's not someone else's. So for instance, sometimes I'm like, I'm looking for makeup and I want something like really exotic, like that's gonna pop. Like I want to look this certain way. And that's what I'm looking for. And that's what I ask for. My mom, on the other hand, likes very like light colors, like spring colors for makeup. And sometimes I just want a more dramatic, darker look, and that's okay. And I'm like, no, but that's not what I want right now. I want this. Is that what you're giving me? She's like, no, but it's so pretty. I'm like, okay, no, but that's not what we're here. Also, I'll just buy both lipsticks if that's going to make you happy. So be like conscientious of what your style is. For me, texture is also really important. So clothes that feel nice when I touch it is what I'm attracted to. So things like that. Also be aware of like what you want to highlight and emphasize like a body wise. So everybody has different shapes. There are clothes for all shapes, all sizes. It doesn't really matter. What matters the most is what makes you feel good, because if you walk out feeling good about what you're wearing, that makes a huge difference with your presentation, like how you interact with people. If I walk out, I'm like, yo, I look good today, I'm going to be a different person than when I walk out, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. Like I just threw this on and what am I going to do with myself? So I think it's really important to emphasize like what looks good. Also think about what your color palette is. I like bright colors. I like color. I am not a neutral person. Two of the people in my team are like, they only like to wear like beige, white, brown, black, and it looks great on them. They're all about the neutral palette. And that's what they love, and I'm all for it. And like my manager wears like a lot of neutral colors, but a lot of like flares. So the other day she was like, I have like Shakespearean sleeves. Like these are big statement sleeves, but it was like a black top, but like her flair was the sleeves. So think about like, what is the thing that you want to make pop? If and when we ever get back into the world of having to walk into the office, I'm a big shoe fanatic. Like shoes are my thing. They're my weakness and my strength, I would say. But what I do is like, if I'm taking public transportation or anything, I'll just wear flats or sneakers and then I'll change in the office. I also always keep some shoes under my desk when I'm in an office. Now that I'm at home, I learned this trick from one of my coworkers. She has like a blazer like in one of her desk drawers for when she needs to throw on a blazer. And she has a scarf for when she's like, now I'm going to look really fancy, I'm going to throw on this scarf. But most of the time she's just wearing like whatever her top is. And then she, like, depending on the meeting, she'll just put that on. It's like a costume change, depending on the meeting you're going on. So just have like those strategies, and what are the things that are going to make your life easier as you are working from home. I think background we've touched on, and that is really important. And if you live with people, make sure that you tell them when you're on camera or you have some kind of signal or something, because otherwise it won't be you that people are looking at. People are really curious about what comes up in the background. So that's what I'll say about that. And I'll take questions when the time comes. And let me shift a little bit to interview. So Joe touched on this, which I love, which is like, thinking about the behavioral questions. And the great thing is that you can go on like Glassdoor and look up the company and the position that you're applying for. And a lot of times people will list exactly what you'll be asked. What I recommend is practicing, because an interview is essentially a performance. And so have stories for all of these things. So like common are, tell me about yourself, and I'll hit on that next. A time that you were like, you overcame a challenge at work, a time that you had a challenge that we're not able to overcome and how that worked. And another really common one is tell me about a time you've worked with a difficult person. Depending on the job, it could be like, tell me about a time when you made a decision based on data. So it just depends on the job, but like definitely have the whole tell me about yourself ready, because it is the first one and it makes the biggest impression. So here's what I recommend. I recommend that you kind of tell the story of your resume in a compelling way. And the way you make it compelling is by not just saying the what, but answering the why. So for instance, I was a psychology and music major in undergrad. And I'll say something along the line. So yeah, I went to Emory University. I graduated with a BA in psychology and music. And the reason I chose those is because I am very interested to understand how people behave and the ways that we can best connect with each other. And because my job I'm a people consultant, that's relevant to that position, right? And also, I like the arts and I like to be well-rounded. And so I am a classical singer. And that just makes you feel like, that's interesting. Like, tell me more about that. And like, talk about your jobs and the reasons that you've had your jobs, and somehow always end with a tie-in. So for me with Cisco, before I went corporate, I was a nonprofit working disability rights in like the blindness field. And my whole selling point was the reason I want to go into this position is because I am very passionate about the rights of people with disabilities. Cisco's mission is to empower a future for all. And disability is so severely underrepresented that it is time that we use business to open more opportunities through the technologies that we make to make more accessible, to make sure that people can fully participate in society. And then B, to make sure that we have that voice represented at the table and that we can start bringing the disabled voice into these spaces in order to create a stronger, more diverse workforce. So I use my background, and I also always recommend like companies that have a mission, y'all, if you can tie in their mission into your answer, they love it. They're like, oh my God, you did your research. And then always, like Joe said, have one or two questions ready for when they ask you, what questions do you have? Don't ever say I have no questions, because then that makes them feel like, oh, well, you're not that interested. So maybe do a little bit of research. Or a really good question is, please tell me about like what your favorite thing is about the place you work in and what your least favorite thing is and what some things that you think could be improved. And that way, like that's a pretty good question for basically any aspect. I did want to touch on briefly what I've noticed is really interesting with blindness. Because we are remote, people don't see you walk in with a cane anymore. And so when you do an interview, it's actually not always apparent to people that you are blind. And what I've started to do is, if I'm not sure about the camera angle, so with my team, if we're ever in the same meeting, but there's a bunch of other people, I'll be texting them like, hey, is my camera okay? And I have put them on notice, like if I'm ever looking up or down, just let me know to adjust. And they do that. But I literally will get on a Zoom with people and be like, can you see me okay? Can you see my whole face? And they won't actually question why you're asking them. They'll just like, oh, yes. Or no, if you can tilt down a little bit further. And that, like, it doesn't always register for people in their brain why you might be asking that. So I think that's a good way, if you're not sure if you want to disclose or not, to give yourself flexibility around that. I feel like I've talked a lot, but I think that's all I wanted to say, and I'm happy to open for question. I also wasn't sure how much time we have, Shara. I don't know if we're going till 4 or 3.
Yeah, we are going until 4. And at 4,
great.
For those of you who want to just stay in the same room, we'll be talking to someone about, to a couple of women about makeup and nails and hair and that kind of stuff. So for those of you who want to stay in for that. So all of you did a fantastic job. Thank you so very much. So I would like to open the floor for questions and see if anybody, and Kevin can tell us if anybody, or you can press, if you're on the computer, press Alt-A to unmute yourself. Tell me, I can't remember how you do it on the phone or on the...
*6 to unmute, or raise your hand, *9.
So the company I was mentioning, by the way, is Way Around. and I put it in the chat.
Oh, fantastic.
They
Thank
have all kinds of different labels, and they even have buttons that you can either sew in your clothes, or I've been thinking about trying them. I haven't tried them yet, but you create a description for it on your phone, and then when you put your phone near it, it plays that description. So,
Oh, that's fantastic. I didn't even know that existed. That's fantastic. Did we have any questions, Kevin?
Not yet. It doesn't look like.
Oh, I'm surprised.
We were thorough.
That's because the three of you were so amazing.
Oh, here we go. Here's Chris. Or is that Tom?
Yes, that's me.
Go ahead, Tom.
So as far as like software design and other like, I guess more technically involved fields, would you say that the dress code for a job interview changes?
I can take that. So Tom, it depends on the company that you're applying for. In the West Coast, so all your big tech companies in the West Coast, you do have a more relaxed dress code. That does not necessarily mean that you should show up in a t-shirt. I would at least go for a polo, like that kind of smart casual. If you're on Zoom, go for a polo, and if you're in person, like polo and khakis, and like nice clean shoes. Please do not show up with like scuffed shoes and stuff. And that's just like generic neutral. But it honestly depends on the company. But yes, generally speaking, West Coast, like literally people show up to work in shorts and stuff. But that's once they got a job. So I would err a little bit more on the cautious when doing an interview, because you want to make that great impression, right? And they don't know how wonderful you are. But once they know how wonderful you are and you're in the door, you can basically, just scope out what other people are wearing and go with that.
if I could just add, I totally agree with that. You are never going to make a bad impression by dressing better than expected, unless you really go over the top. Like I don't recommend showing up for an interview in a tux. but you're never going to offend or insult anybody if you dress better than you think they expect, or as well as it's possible for you to dress. You will offend and upset people if they get the impression that you didn't take the interview seriously and just threw on some clothes and showed up and really don't care. So
yeah, and Joe here, want to piggyback on that quickly, just to reinforce and drive home what Mary and Chris just said. Tom, first, thank you for your question. And basically, it's the same answer: is you want to overdress than underdress. And then once you get your foot in the door, you can then do what you seem fit. Then the only thing I wanted to add is that's what I did when I first got my career with the Commonwealth here in Massachusetts. And then I asked a few individuals that I heard of, didn't know, but they were fully sighted, and asked them, what's the dress code really? So tell me, what do you see? And this is what they told me. Everything in between, from SpongeBob t-shirts to then our commissioner wearing full-blown suits every day, from people rocking jeans, so to speak, but with a blazer and a belt and nice boots and a button-up, but no tie. So hopefully that answers your question, Tom. But I think the theme is better go in there more conservative than not.
And I want to add one more thing to that too, which is sometimes it's situational. Like my job at any moment, I may have to be on television or on video. And I may be representing the organization in a very formal way. So I always, even though our dress code is smart casual now, I always keep a blazer and a tie and a button-down shirt in my office, so that if I suddenly have an interview that I need to deal with, I can, if I feel that it's needed, dress up a little bit to make that impression. And we are encouraged to do that in our job. Or if we have outside meetings where it's really important to make a strong impression, internal meetings are one thing. It's just your colleagues. They see you every day anyway. external. So there may be external, it can be different. So there may be a dynamic like that you need to be aware of as well.
I'll just add one more thing, Tom. Now you got all kinds of information. Say, for the tech industry specifically, all of the companies, the big tech companies, and even the startups, they pride themselves in a certain culture. So just like by looking at their website and stuff, you'll have an idea of what you're aiming for. Because I also don't recommend, frankly, if everyone is wearing like shorts and a t-shirt and you show up in a full suit,
yeah,
that also is not a good look, right? And so I think, like, yes, aim for better dress than not, but understand what the base level is.
Yes.
Because it won't take a tux to be overdressed, right? It might just be that you want to put on a sports blazer on top, no tie, right? So I think like understanding that base level, and the way to get that is understanding the culture of the company, and the way to get that honestly is looking on their socials and their website and what their brand is.
Thank you for that. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you all very much. Yeah, I think even, my son, when he was in high school going to job interviews, at fast food restaurants and stuff, it's like, at least put on a polo shirt, and a pair of, and I think that's, he wants to wear a hoodie and a sweatpants, and it's like, no, that's not cute. Do we have any other questions?
If you do, you can unmute and ask or raise your hand. Leslie's got her hand up. Leslie, you're unmuted.
So I had a question. Since we're in a time when we have to wear a face mask, I like to personalize mine. I have like a really pretty sparkly silver face mask. Would things like that be okay?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I'm all into like still figuring out how do I use this mask, this horrible thing hiding my gorgeous face.
But yeah, totally.
Get a accessory. And I think that, yeah, definitely having those personal touches. Again, it depends. If you're doing a Zoom interview, right? Like, you don't have to wear a mask. But if you are walking into an office, I would say what I would say for any other accessory, make it so that it complements your outfit, not you don't want it to be the sole focus of attention, right? Because you want it to be so I would, if I was going into a job interview where I had to go in person and had to wear a mask the whole time, I would probably go a little more neutral, or like just light decoration, if that makes sense. Like maybe like some chiffon or lacing, or like different shapes, something like that, or like a 2 shades going on, something that kind of complements my outfit but is not the center of my outfit.
Mm-hmm.
And to add to kind of accessories from a different perspective from a male, for those that care about some style or fashion forward, you can also accessorize, right? One thing you could do is a tie pin if we're going formal. Others are your cufflinks. Another thing to mention is there's a pocket in your blazer jacket or your suit jacket. You can use handkerchiefs. And if you don't know how to fold, I'm putting my hand in front of my lips here. Shh. There's pre-folded handkerchiefs with cardboard that you can buy from like Men's Warehouse or K&G or Primark or wherever you decide that you can match your handkerchief with your tie. So there's so many ways. And Mary had talked about shoes, even for men, right? Polish your shoes and you can wear one with no shoelaces, some with just a zipper. So the list goes on. And then last but not least, and then if Chris has anything to add, you can wear a watch. You don't want to overdo it and be very gaudy, but there's a way for men to express themselves and add value to their outfit to show you're very put together. How I like to say it is your blind brand, right? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it really, the only thing I would add to that, and I really like all those ideas, and I have done all those things myself in different situations. And it really, I mean, we always want to raise expectations of blind people. And one of the signals that you're sending, if you look really sharp, is that you understand that that's important, even though you're a blind person, and that that is raising expectations. That tells the interviewee that you're, because in the back of their mind, they may be thinking, if they know that you're blind, or if it's obvious, they may be thinking, well, how does this person present themselves? So the best thing you can do is present yourself really well, so that they understand that you understand that presentation is important. Because unfortunately, just because we can't see other people doesn't mean that people stop noticing our appearance. So just always be really conscious of that.
I wanted to add something else and address this, because we've been talking very binary. So if you're looking for a more gender neutral look, you can mix and match all of these things that we're talking about. So for
Yeah.
you can add a bow tie if you want to go more gender neutral to what would be considered like a classically female outfit. Or, you don't like, women don't have to wear heels. That's like a very 1801 notion.
Mm-hmm.
So do whatever feels good on your feet and make you comfortable. So yeah, and like you can use, cufflinks as somebody who wants to be more gender neutral, but identifies as a woman. And that this is something I think that we should start thinking about. How do we speak about these things when we want to
Absolutely.
Agreed.
neutrality?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. And also, as Mary mentioned earlier, and Chris also, about keeping a blazer on hand when you have to put that on. And also for women, when you're walking around the office and in the back office with your colleagues, you can wear flats. And maybe if you go and you're in an important interview or an important meeting, you might want to slide on those heels. So to keep those heels around might be a good idea if you are comfortable, if you're the kind of person that wears heels.
Hello, this is Tom again speaking. I have another question.
We have Tom. Can you hold on just one quick second? Because we only have time for one more question.
Oh,
and
sorry.
So I just want to make, that's okay. Because I just want to make sure if there's anyone else that had a question, since you already had a chance, if that's possible, but there may not be. Kevin.
Nobody else has so far.
Okay, go ahead, Tom, then.
Okay, so as far as interview questions go, aside from the ones that Joe already mentioned, are there any specific to coronavirus interview questions that a employer might ask?
Not really. Not really. I mean, what they're primarily concerned with is, do you have a stable internet connection? And then, I mean, what you could ask them, honestly, is more around what their COVID policy is if somebody was to get sick and that kind of thing. And they all should be saying, like, you get at least 2 weeks off. But aside from that, they shouldn't be asking you COVID questions unless it's relevant to your job, going to the medical field or something like that.
Yeah, and also for entry-level positions, like, obviously you're not going to ask you a ton about, like, your work experience, but how would they tie in, like, college extracurriculars or internships or something like that into their interview questions? And how can they tell if someone is fresh out of college?
So, Tom, thanks for your question. I mentioned earlier you were describing your youth, because you're the budding professional here in the room, amongst others. I think the way I'm understanding that is when they see your resume, and depending on the layout, they'll kind of get a comprehension of where you are post-college. One way is to really own it in many ways, and in kind of what Mary had mentioned, and tell your story about internships and everything in between, from your volunteer work and anything that you did on campus, to share with them, but then describe it in a way that you're not green, you're not wet behind the ears, that you're eager, you're enthusiastic, and that you're a quick learn and you can hit the ground running. And because of all of these things that you have, whether you talk about at your university and post-graduation, that you'll be the number one candidate because of those skill sets. So I would try to market yourself as valuable opposed to being kind of youth oriented, if that makes sense.
Okay, because it is hard to kind of avoid the entry-level employee fresh out of college stigma, I feel. Because my thought is that if an employer sees that I'm fresh out of college or even that I'm in college, they may not take me as serious, or they may not have as many questions for me because of my relative lack of experience.
So what I would say to that, Tom, honestly, it depends on the employer. Most employers for most positions, if they're practicing best practicing for hiring, honestly, they have a list of questions that they ask everyone. So it should be the same,
Correct.
whether they ask you or somebody who's been working for 30 years. The other thing I would say is that, and I always try to remind people of this, free work is still work. So and what I mean by that is just because maybe I organized an event for free for the NFB, that's the same skill set I would use to organize an event for Cisco, who's paying me, right? You need to be organized. You need to time manage. You need to contact people. Like all of those things are applicable and are transferable. So I would focus on like, I have done X, Y, and Z. I created this event where X number of people came. Like the same things you would say for a job, like what outcomes you made, would be the same things I would do for volunteer jobs. One way of doing that, a framework that might be helpful is when they ask you behavioral questions of tell me of a time when. A framework that's useful is like challenge, action, result. Well, I had this challenge where we needed to fundraise. I created this event, that's the action, and the result is that we raised $10,000 or whatever the case may be. So thinking about it that way for your volunteer and extracurricular activities.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, that's all that we have time for today. We're getting ready for our next session, and I want to give a huge thanks to Chris Danielson, to Mary Fernandez, and to Joey Buzon, and thank you all very, very much. Of course, we would love for you all to stay with us if you can, or go join another session, but the next one coming up is makeup and nails and hair, because we had many people who were interested in learning more about those things, and we have blind people with them. So thank you all again very much for coming, and we appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Take care, folks. Bye-bye now.
See
Stay
you
safe.
later in the conference.
Bye.
Thank you guys. Great presentations.
I learned so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Shara, I'm going to text you real quick.
Okay, yeah, and I got to step away from the computer for just.
Okay.